Welcome to the Biz Dad Podcast, where we dive into the melding of fathership and entrepreneurship with your host, the original Biz Dad himself, Adam Labar. Adam is a Christian, a former Air Force officer, a dad to 3 amazing kids, a coach, a real estate investor, and a business owner. On this podcast, he'll explore the unique journeys of amazing dads who are striving for greatness in both business and family. So whether you're a dad who is an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply a man striving to be a better dad, get ready as the Biz Dad brings you conversations to inspire, challenge, and equip you to be a better dad and entrepreneur. And now, here's Adam.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Biz Dad Podcast. Today, I am super excited to talk to Mike Wagner, who I found out has the same area code as me right before we started this. So I was like, wait a minute, this guy's a New Yorker. But he stayed up there. I ran away. Mike, I am looking forward to having a good conversation with you. If you can, please go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us about your family and tell us about your business.
Yeah, Adam, I'm happy to. And first, I appreciate you having me on, man. I love having meaningful conversations, and fatherhood and business both fall into that category for me. So happy to share. My name's Mike Wagner. I live in Western New York, a small town outside of Rochester, at least for most of the year. My family and I spend 4 or 5 months a year on the road, pulling a camper behind our truck and just exploring this great country we live in. So that's how we have a lot of fun. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Melanie. We've been together since 1999. Married since 2008. So if you knew how old we are, you would know that we've been together since she was 15. My defense is that I was only 17. I say that to settle everybody down. But we've been together since we were kids. We've got 4 beautiful children. William is my oldest. He's 12. Lucy and Emma are my girls in the middle. They are 10 and 6. And then our youngest, Jack, just turned 2.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And the business question is a harder one for me to answer right now, simply because I'm in a season of transition. For the last couple years, probably for the last 3 years, I pretended to be in a sabbatical, did my best relative to how much I used to work. It felt like a sabbatical, but I now, with the benefits of hindsight in the rearview mirror, I see that it's only been about the last 6 months where I truly slowed down and allowed my system to rest a bit. So I'm kind of between business ventures. I've sold off most of what I used to do actively to earn money. And I am also allowing the next thing to emerge, and I'm happy to get into the details of the past or the future.
Yeah.
The short version is I went to school to be a physical therapist, spent 6 years and $250,000 to get 3 degrees. I ended up with a doctor of physical therapy and then started practicing. Really enjoyed helping people. Was challenged by the academic and intellectual aspects of physical therapy and using those skills to help grandma recover after a stroke or a hip surgery or seizures or any number of things. And I really loved it, except by year 4 or so, I was already starting to get burnout. So the joke I say is that I practiced long enough to almost make my money back from my college tuition. The short version of the story is I essentially... I figured out that when you're 18 and drunk most of the time, it's probably not the best to decide what you want to do for the rest of your life. And so deciding to be a physical therapist at that age just was my best decision and the one that didn't turn out to be right for me. So yeah. 4 years in, I knew there was something else out there. At the time, I'll just be honest and say I was chasing money pretty strongly, and I wanted freedom more than the money itself. So I started buying houses, and I became a landlord. Did that for a couple years, and it worked well. It just didn't get me where I wanted to go fast enough. And so that's kind of a theme with me. Up until recently, I could never get anywhere fast enough. Mm-hmm. But I made the transition to self-storage back in 2011. Bought my first storage facility, quit my job as a physical therapist the day I closed on it, despite the fact that it was losing $2,000 a month the day I bought it. Probably not the most prudent decision, but one that worked out really well for us. Storage went well enough. I applied what I learned as a landlord to a much more efficient asset class. And at risk of sounding arrogant, it's the asset class that set us free. Mm-hmm. I quit my job the day I bought that facility, even though I really had no right to do so yet. But within a year, I was able to retire my wife from working. We had our first son.
Nice.
We were both basically stay-at-home parents for a little bit. And then, things evolved from there. I kind of repeated the process where we would buy underperforming, neglected storage facilities, and then we would turn them around. We would do a physical and an operational overhaul and then implement a remote unmanned operation system that I kind of cobbled together out of necessity back in the day. And it worked. It moved me from working full-time as a therapist to full-time as a storage guy, and then pretty quickly thereafter part-time as a storage guy. We repeated that process all around the country a handful of times over the next several years. And then in 2019, I appreciated all the money we had made and the freedom that it had created in our life, and felt like there had to be something more. And at the time, I thought to myself, well, it must be impact. That must be the thing that's missing. And so I built an education company to kind of teach other people how to do what we did. It's called the Storage Rebellion. It still operates today. My good friend Chris bought it from me earlier this year and is stewarding it and evolving it in some awesome ways. And the goal of that company was to use ordinary garages to create extraordinary lives. And internally, what I was trying to do was help 40 people find the financial freedom that I had found through storage. And at risk of turning this into a therapy session, the subconscious hope that I had was that if I could do that, then I'd finally be enough.
Yeah.
Right? Then I'd be okay. And it was a great venture, as I alluded to. I just sold it in the last year and have been doing a lot of soul searching and resting and figuring out, okay, what does life from a professional standpoint look like going forward? Yeah, so I guess I'll put a pause there and let you ask any follow-ups you want.
Well, there's a load of follow-ups I can go down here. The one that I really want to pull on at the moment is that comment you said, finally be enough. Where do you think that came from? Where do you think that the need to be more came from, right? Because hey, I'm going to go be a doctor and I'm going to go do this. Okay, well, that's typically you're striving for something there, right? It's coming from somewhere. And then it was like, nope, that didn't do it. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to go do this. And now I've got a wife and a kid and I'm making a bunch of money. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, that didn't do it. And now it's okay, let me make impact. And okay, that didn't do it. Like, where do you think it came from that you were just like, man, I need to finally be enough?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I could literally take us down a million different rabbit holes, because it's the thing I've been exploring for the last probably 3 or 4 years. When I mentioned before that I took a sabbatical for the last 3 years, I stopped working professionally, dedicated all of my energy to, of course, my family, and even a higher priority for me over the last couple of years was kind of going on this healing journey and rediscovering who I am and all of that stuff. And so instead of going 100 miles an hour at the business, I was going 100 miles an hour at a healing journey. So to say that you'll only be good enough if belief was pretty deeply embedded in me would be an understatement. I mean, it so deeply that I applied it to the act of trying to heal.
Yeah.
But to answer your question more directly, where does it come from? We could trace it probably back even before this, but the short version of the story is my mother and father divorced when I was 2, long before I was conscious of it, obviously. And then my father passed away when I was 7. And what I've since discovered is those events, as well as, some of the other chaos that ensued in, a single family household where poverty was, our reality. My mom spread very thin, amazing woman, super strong, and also did the best she could in a really tough situation. And so there was, it was a chaotic childhood, to say the least. The way I describe it now is all of those bad things that happened basically hijacked my nervous system. I now understand that it put me into a state of constant fight or flight. And it was all built on that idea, I'm only good enough if. I was essentially, yes, I was trying to earn my worth, but I don't say that in like a judgmental way anymore, although for a while I had to contend with that. I was really using achievement as a way to securitize myself, right? It was working really hard to impress people. Yeah, there was an element that your opinion of me mattered more than my own opinion of me, right? I was more interested in impressing people than I was in actually feeling good on the inside. And I learned it kind of implicitly. This isn't, when I say I learned, I don't mean I had the thought. My system believed that if I could arrange my life in such a way, if I could manipulate, and not in a malicious way, but just arrange the outside world to be just so, then maybe I'd feel okay inside. And that's all I was ever trying to do, was feel okay inside. I just had no idea how to do it, right? Because I had been hit with such big emotions at such a young age, and I didn't have any of the skills to process them. So I did what I think a lot of people in our society, and oftentimes men get a bad rap for doing this more often, but I think it just manifests itself differently in women too. Our whole society incentivizes us to suppress our emotions and our pain in favor of an image, or an image of walking through the world successfully.
Okay. How many siblings do you have?
I have 3 sisters. 2 of them are full biological. I consider all of them full sisters, but 2 of them are fully biological sisters with my mom and dad. And then after my mom and dad got divorced, my father remarried and had another younger daughter, obviously. So I've got 3 sisters total.
Okay, so 2 older, 1 younger?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Were you put in a position at that young age, right? 7 years old, your dad passes. Now you're quote unquote the man of the house, right? Did you feel like you were pressured into being the man of the house, or was it not even implicit? Was it almost said like, hey, you've got to step it up now?
Yeah, it was definitely said by well-intentioned people that were, trying to support my mom, right? If they can get me to be the man of the house, then I'll be one less person that mom has to worry about and wrangle and keep in check.
Yeah.
It backfired. But yeah, that was said to me. And even without it being said, there was an aspect of me that took on that role anyways. And I think the most important thing to point toward here is, like, I had this idea was implanted in me that if my mom knew how much pain and sadness was inside of me, she wouldn't be able to handle it. Like, she was already spread thin trying to keep everything together. And so, like, my need for love felt like a burden. And if I asked her to love me, I didn't know that she'd have the capacity to actually do it back. Like, I thought it would scare her away if I asked her to tend to the wounds that I had experienced.
Yeah.
And again, I'm 7 years old. These aren't my conscious thoughts. This is in retrospect what happened. I was legitimately scared that if she knew how much pain was inside of me, she wouldn't be able to handle it, and then I'd be on my own, right? That whole abandonment idea. And there was also this idea that if I asked her to love me and she wasn't able to, it would only confirm what I already believed about myself, which is that I was unlovable. Like, this was a core wound deep inside of me that only came to light in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. And there's a lot of items in there I'd like to dig into. And I talked to a lot of guys when they were talking about divorces and all this stuff. And in the military, I talked about it a ton. Like, you're going to impact your kids one way or another, whether you're inside of your house or whether you're outside of your house with another man raising your kids. You're making an impact on your kids. And in your case, at 2 years old, you weren't cognizant of the fact that there was loss there. But man, oh man, you look back at it when you start to have the memories and you can go, wait a minute, my dad walked out, my dad left, whatever story you put in your head about it, whether it's still, boy, we may not have been good enough for him to stick around. We may not have, what was going on with this? What was going on with that? And then for 5 years later for him to pass. How did your dad pass, if you don't mind me asking?
He had a heart attack. He was actually on a work assignment. He was living in Europe for 2 years, and while there had a massive heart attack in the middle of a business meeting and wasn't able to be revived. He was 37 years old
37
at the time.
That's crazy. Yeah, my dad's dad died at like 39 or something like that of a heart attack as well. And so that was one of those things that, I looked at my dad and said, okay, well, he's older now. He didn't have a heart attack. They look at me. I'm like, all right, well, I passed that age too. So I'm in a better shot. But he also did a massive amount of drinking and smoking and all this stuff. I talk to the dads out here that maybe, because we seem to be going down a trend here, or a topic here, and rather than me continuing to ask questions about the impact it had on you, I want you to throw it over to the dads who may be hearing this, who may be struggling, like, man, I think it is time to and maybe this is because, and I'm going to preface this with, I was recently on, I don't know, some dad's group that I'm on in Facebook, right? And this anonymous member talked about how, he needed to somehow convince his spouse he needed more than just the family, to have a fulfilled life. He needed to have these hobbies, he needed to have these things. Totally get it. Like, I love to golf. I don't golf almost nearly as much as I used to because I've got 3 kids and I run business, right? So I almost don't have hobbies, but I still have a very fulfilled life with my 3 amazing kids and my beautiful wife. But when it came down to it, he started saying, "Oh, I just don't want to have kids." Well, first off, that ship has sailed. You made that decision already, and now you have kids. Now it's time to step up. But we're in a world full of boys who never grew up, if you ask me. Like, they never were taught how to turn themselves into men. They never turned themselves into men. And then when they finally, and they're in a society where being a man is toxic. So it's like, okay, how do we talk to these men who maybe have not gotten themselves to become men yet? They're of manly age, but not intellect or emotions or anything. How do we talk to them about, hey, the importance of maintaining that solid relationship with your spouse and your kids, how to work through those things? Because you obviously had the impact of it, and it took you until you were this age with 4 kids to really go, wow, like this is what was actually going on. So I want to talk to those dads who may be thinking about leaving their spouse, who are regretting having kids, who are those types of things, to say, hey, like, this is a new charge for you and where you're at.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is, I don't believe that a husband and wife should ever stay together for the kids. I think that does the kids a very real disservice. And that doesn't mean in any way that I promote separation in all but the extreme circumstances. I believe that marriage is a fundamentally beneficial structure to humanity. And a lot of the problems we see in society are the result of the disintegration of the family. And so, having said that, I'm going to make this about me, but it's about all the guys listening. I had all those same questions, right? Well, first of all, I was initiated into manhood by my peers, and they were not men, and so they didn't know what it meant to be a man, and so they initiated me into adolescence, right? And I used alcohol and drugs to self-medicate and avoid the pain of my childhood from the time I was 15 until pretty aggressively until 25, and then I got into the real world and at least had to keep up appearances, so I white-knuckled moderation for another 10 years until, I guess it's 8 years ago now or so, I decided that drinking wasn't serving me in any way, and so I set all that down. But what I recognized to be true, once I got clear and really honest with myself about why I was unhappy, it became clear to me why my dad had left. And what I recognized to be true, I believe for him, I wasn't in his skin, so I can't say, but I know it started to feel true for me, and my lived experience, in the consequences of the choices he made, kind of crystallized this for me. And here's the short version. I believe my father left not because he's a bad guy, but because it was easier for him to blame my mother, his wife, and his children for his unhappiness than it was to look inside himself and find the real source of why he was unhappy. And I'm incredibly grateful that God gave me at least enough wisdom, and I'm a slow learner, dude, I'll tell you that, but at least enough wisdom to see that and go, oh, like, I went through a phase where I didn't want to be around my family at all. Like, it was a depression, but it was an apathetic, irritable depression. I didn't look sad. I looked like an ass. And I couldn't make sense of it because I'm like, what is wrong with me? I love these people more than anything, and I can't handle being with them. And so there was a 6-month period where my wife and I we still lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, we're still cordial, but I literally built a shed in the backyard and would go there every time I got triggered so that I didn't explode on my kids in the house, right? So I was protecting them in some way, but I was also running away from the people, my wife and children, with whom God gifted me as the mirrors to my own experience. And I'm not going to say that they taught me things that I needed to know, but I learned in my relationship to them everything I needed to know about myself to start down this healing process, right? And I'm nowhere near done. Let's just be clear on that. I'm not preaching from the top of a mountain. Like, this is a journey I'm on. But I've been exploring these woods for a while, and I've started to learn, at least for myself, some of what's going on. And to bring it back full circle to your question, before any man leaves his wife, before he has a dramatic impact on his children the way you alluded he would if he leaves, and of course that's true, I implore them to take a really, really, really honest look at themselves and take responsibility for how they feel. And I'll go one step further and say, listen, part of what I did was I married a beautiful woman who made me feel a certain way. And if you had asked me, I would have told you I loved her. And to the greatest extent possible, I did. I loved her deeply if she made me feel a certain way. And in the beginning, it was really easy for her to make me feel that way. And as time went on, it became harder because I was asking her to do something she wasn't capable of, which was to fulfill me. That was an unfair burden to place on her. And when she couldn't do it, I resented her for it. I applied the same, in a different way, but the same logic to my children. I didn't consciously have kids as a way to complete myself, but subconsciously that was the hope, that they would fulfill me. And so essentially I was trying to fill what I now know to be a spiritual void in my life with worldly things, including the woman that I love and the children that I love more than anything on this planet. But they couldn't do that part of it for me. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I stopped asking them to and started to take responsibility for myself that I began to see the path forward.
Yeah, I'm glad you wrapped it up there at the end in that way, because as I was listening to you, I was like, yeah, you're trying to get a human being to fill a God-shaped hole, and that's not possible. When we tie our identity or our feelings or success in something other than a never-changing being, yeah, well, it's gonna move, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, that hole just shifted. It's opened up more. I need to figure out how to fill that back in, and I need to do this, I need to do that, and then you start chasing, and then it becomes a never-ending race. You're in constant marathons and exhausted, and it's never going to work out well for you. So, man,
it's so funny you say that, dude. It's so funny you use that analogy, because when I quit drinking, the way I quit is I implemented a rule that was I have to run a mile for every drink I have. Now, not on a daily basis, because if you're drinking 15 beers one night, you're not running 15 miles the next day. But on a monthly basis, this was my junior year of college, so I was probably 22 or 23. It was like my 5th year. I put that rule in place and I started running, and it was a great way to moderate my my drinking. And eventually, I just replaced the addiction to alcohol with an addiction to exercise, and quite literally spent a decade. I did dozens of marathons, couple long full distance triathlons, to the point where like I was addicted to it such that I ran hard enough and fast enough to, I want to be careful of and respectful of the audience, but to bleed out of places no man wants to bleed out of for 6 hours. Like I pushed my body to literally the point of internal decay.
Yeah.
And it was, to your point, a way to run away from the truth of the experience that at the time, dude, I wasn't even consciously aware of the chaos of my childhood. Like there were memories. I would have told you, I don't know, I got like 5 or 10 memories of my childhood. They're nothing. And it wasn't until a couple years ago when I really started to intentionally approach the pain that I felt and the discontent and the anxiety that emerged and the insecurities and all of these things, that the curtain started to lift, and I got to see behind. I'm like, oh my God, I actually have a bunch of memories of my childhood. They were just behind a curtain that, generally speaking, a curtain of shame that it took me a while to realize it, but was there to protect me until I was ready to feel that pain. And now that I have, it's like I've got a whole new relationship to who I am and who I was when I was drunk and when I was addicted to exercise and all those things. They were just my best attempts to securitize myself. And misguided, yeah, of course, but listen, we all just do the best we can for as long as we can until we know how to do better. And so that was, anyways, I share that as an aside because your marathon analogy hits home.
Yeah, I would imagine. It sounds like it does. You were with your wife for 2 years while you were already drinking, right? You said you started drinking at 15, you're 17 when you get with her, she's 15. You guys are together for a while before you get married. She's watching all of this happening. What sort of conversations do the two of you guys have while all the alcohol is being drank, while all of the things are going nuts in your life, and she's still kind of hanging around, which, not to speak ill of your wife, but she should have ran away from you with the signs that she was seeing, but she didn't, right? And thank God she didn't, as it all worked out now. But let me throw, like, what sort of conversation were you guys having? Or was she involved in the same nonsense you were?
Yeah, no, she really wasn't. I mean, she allowed me to be crazy, but she was also, she's a good hometown girl, modest and reserved, and the extent to I use the extremes of growth as a way to securitize myself, she uses stability to securitize herself, and so she resists the chaos that I produce, and in that way we're a good complement. But back then, dude, I was just a high schooler partying. I wasn't, I was always a friendly drunk. I wasn't out getting in fights, really. I mean, maybe once or twice, but more than that, I was just out having fun. I was the one when we were drunk at the park that would get nominated to go sweet talk the cop into letting us drive away, of all things. But I was very high functioning. So I hid my love for drugs and alcohol well enough from her and from other people, anyone else that I wasn't doing it with, my drinking buddies and college buddies and whatnot. I hid it well enough that when I told my wife I was going to stop drinking, she was like, "But why? You don't have a problem." And I was like, "Not one that you can see."
Yeah.
But I had white-knuckled moderation for 10 years by that point, and it was like, whether I now know it's called cognitive dissonance. Long story short, when I woke up in the morning, if I hadn't had a drink, I was mad at myself for being so hard on myself. Just lighten up, Wags. You don't have a problem. Like, have a drink. And if I did have a drink and I woke up in the morning, then the other half of my brain was pissed off at me for having the drink, right? And so there was no winning. It was a split vote, and every morning I woke up hating the choice I had made the night before. And I was wasting so much energy that I eventually just said, all right, I'm going to test drive sobriety. I never said I'll never drink again. I still don't say that. And there's two things going on there. One is I know as soon as I tell myself I'm not allowed to, I want it twice as bad. And two, I really don't know what the future holds.
Yeah.
What I do know is that I can't imagine a set of circumstances where I would want to drink again, because every day that's one more day removed from when I had my last drink just keeps getting better and better. Like, I rather feel the pain of a bad day than be numb to it. And so I don't know that answers your question directly. The long story is, she was concerned at times. She was worried because we'd go out partying late at night. She knew I wasn't being smart about driving home and that sort of thing. So she was worried about, like, the fallout of my bad decisions, but she never knew that, like, the extent to which I loved how I felt when I was drunk or high. Like, It was the only time where the voices in my head went quiet, dude. It was like, back then at least. Obviously now I'm more capable at quieting those voices down a little bit, but back then that was my only recourse.
And I think I would imagine, just based off of my interactions with a lot of entrepreneurs and people whose brain goes 1,000 miles an hour, that is one of the things that helps them, is they just take that drink. It calms them down enough. I'd say that it's probably me as well, where I can have a glass of scotch or a glass of bourbon and just kind of, I can actually, like, watch a TV show now, or I can actually, have a normal conversation without having to think about the 7,000 other things that pop in my brain. How do you kind of deal with that now? What did you do to kind of separate that thought process and go, okay, well, now I can calm myself down. Now I can realize that that's what that was doing, and this is how I'm able to do it now and refocus that brain. Yeah,
and I wish I had an easy, like, magic bullet answer for you. Oh, I just did this, and now I'm great at it.
Right now, I've got the pen ready to write the magic bullet recipe down.
Dude, I mean, the first thing, the most important aspect is a genuine desire. Like, a lot of people talk about wanting the peace and, I just want quiet. I want peace, and I don't want to have a drink to take the edge off. I just want that. And intellectually and consciously, that is what they want. But what's happening is, at a systems level, their system actually prefers the familiar imbalance of, I call red line thinking, right? Like that 7,000 RPM, just go, go, go. the system actually prefers that the familiarity of that imbalance than actual balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And that's why they gravitate toward it. And we actually, if I look back, I can see, oh, I made choices. Like, I could have just sat on the couch and not run dozens of marathons. But internally, I was redlining. Sitting on the couch trying to watch a TV show, I felt agitated. And there was no alignment in that. I couldn't make sense of it. And because I didn't know how to bring myself down and relax, for lack of a better word, I needed alignment. So instead what I did is I consciously implemented what most people would call a healthy choice. I'd go for a run. But what I was doing is I was imposing a physical stress onto my system so that the red line I was feeling inside all the time actually made sense.
Yeah.
And in that's how I got addicted to it, was because you've got to run more to keep, ratcheting up. And so to answer your question directly about how I did it, I got very serious about getting help. I surrounded myself with people. I started seeing a therapist for the first time, I don't know, I guess this is 5 years ago, and started talking through some of this stuff. And that was helpful. It allowed me to start to make sense of it. But what really opened the door for me are what I would describe as experiential therapies. So some traditional, some non-traditional therapies, but going beyond talk therapy, that allowed my system to start to heal. So we're talking about breath work, internal family systems, some psychedelic assisted therapy sessions that I did a couple years ago, lots of memoir writing. And ultimately what I had to do was, my brain was so efficient and could run 7,000 RPMs all the time. The way I describe it is, because it's just like your biceps. If you go to the gym and exercise only your biceps, they're going to get really big and really strong. Mm-hmm. Well, I had hid in my brain for 40 years. What was I hiding from? My emotions. So the feelings I had and the sensations in or on my body. Listen, you don't run a marathon fast enough to poop blood for 6 hours by connecting to your body. You dissociate and you disconnect and you use your brain to override every healthy instinct that your body has to stop what you're doing, right? And so what I had to do was, little by little, develop the courage and then start to reconnect to my body and approach all of the things that I had been running from for as long as I had. Alcohol is just a way to numb against. It's running from our problems. Mm-hmm. Not that it's a terrible thing to take the edge off with a drink by any stretch, unless your goal is to establish your own intrinsic capacity to take your own edge off. Well, then the alcohol is doing harm because it's robbing you of the opportunity to self-soothe.
Yeah. Interesting. I would imagine, boy, I'm not sure where I want to go with that one. It's the self-soothe portion, because I think personally that the therapy can be a phenomenal thing, right? The sit down, talk therapy, work through some of those things, understand where it's all coming from. But there's another side of my brain that looks at it that I think we're over therapized society at this point, where all we can do is just talk about all of our problems all the time. That turns us all into just these self-focused, oh my goodness type of things. How do we make sure that we, because you seem to have now taken that and you're like, okay, I'm going to pour all of this into my family now, and I'm going to make sure that I'm on the right track for all of them. And oftentimes what it looks like to me is a lot of the therapy ends up being, oh, I'm going to do all of this just for me, and everything. That person, what's going on? How do we guard ourselves from turning it into, oh, this is just all about me and getting help for myself, and turn it into, no, I'm doing this so that I can show up better to the world, not so that I can just feel so much better about myself and walk through with my, chest out and head held high, all excited about me.
Yeah, it's a great question, dude, and one I wrestled with for a long time. For me, the big difference is that's why the experiential therapies are so much more effective at creating transformational change, like real transformation. The traditional therapies, and to your point, they're valid and good to a certain extent, but they're meant to help us cope. They're meant to help us deal with the brokenness inside of us. And it's like, listen, we're all human. We're broken to some extent, but most of us are far more broken than we need to be because we're not healing what needs to be healed. And the over-therapized sentiment that you're, I think, rightfully witnessing is the byproduct of the world trying to put Band-Aids on shit and pretending that fixes it. If I can cope and make it through, right? Dude, even if you look at like the diagnostic tools that they use, like, do you have a problem that needs therapy or not? It's based on whether or not it interferes with your daily life. I spent 40 years pretty messed up, but doing it well enough that no one thought it was interfering with my daily life. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like, well, that's a broken model to begin with. And so all we do is put these Band-Aids over the top and hoping it'll fix. Now, here's where, and hopefully this doesn't go too deep too fast, but I get hung up on like the selfishness of it and the selflessness of it, because I think our separation, like, yes, you and I are two distinct individuals, but we're more connected than the world would have us believe. And our separation is an illusion rooted in, I would say, sin, if I was speaking spiritually, or if I was speaking worldly, I would say trauma. Trauma is just the physical byproduct of an assault to our system. It's the physical manifestation in our nervous system of the effect of sin. That's all it is. Sin and trauma are the same thing. Just one's spiritual, one's physical. When I talked earlier about how I started to resent my wife and children, and when we were talking about men that want to leave their families because they're unhappy, that wasn't true love. That was a conditional kind of love. And the only way for me to move beyond a conditional love of my wife and kids, I can't give them anything I don't give myself. And so when I was only good enough to myself, when I only accepted myself if I was conditionally loving myself. And because of that, the best I could offer my wife and kids was conditional love. So I spent the last 3 years outwardly very selfish. And my wife and I talked about it, and I said, listen, I promise I'm not going to be this needy for forever, but I have to do this work. And so she would take on the burden. I would leave for 3 days at a time, go do a psychedelic therapy session, come back, and have to integrate that work, because those things aren't magic either, and they're not shortcuts. They're a very intense way to break through a lot of the subconscious barriers that we have. They're a great way to break through to the other side of our issues that talk therapy really has a hard time getting through, right? And so when I became selfish for the last couple years, it was ultimately so that I could love my wife and children in a Christ-like way rather than in the really selfish way, which is I'll love you if you make me feel okay.
Yeah.
Right?
And
so there's
a Mike life way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The conversations you have with your wife now about all of this, what does that look like? You guys have been together for a long time. You guys have been through a lot together. You obviously let you kind of go off on these things, and I want to step back for a second as well. Like, you're talking about being a prior military guy, my wife being now retired military as well. I've seen a lot of PTSD, all the different crazy things that go on in the world. Deployed to Iraq, deployed to Afghanistan, jumping in and out of helicopters, doing crazy, stupid things with a bunch of amazing dudes. But a lot of those dudes come back and end up killing themselves, right? 22 veterans a day killing themselves, not dealing with work, not having somebody that they can actually communicate this stuff with. Talk therapy is just not cutting it. But it's amazing. Like, there was a study out of, I think it was Southern California, I can't remember, but just recently they brought a bunch of like high-level special operations guys to Mexico for some ayahuasca, walk through all of this stuff, and they were flabbergasted at the results of how they were able to break through these guys where their PTSD was like basically gone. In the first go around, if my memory serves me correctly, it was like 70 or 80% of them were like, hey, like I don't have those thoughts anymore. I don't have these nightmares anymore. I don't have these things anymore. Like, what in the world? And nobody in the psychology world could believe it. They were like, this doesn't make any sense, right? But yet, obviously, there's a barrier to break there, and it has worked. So I'm saying all that to say, like, to bolster your thought process on what you're talking about. But yet, you now have to have those communications with your wife. Like, these are the things I'm working on. You had to be open enough with her so that she understood why you needed to do this, where before she didn't even think you had a problem. And now all of a sudden you're like, no, this is a problem enough to where I need to do some of these things. So what sort of conversation do you have to sit down with your wife to allow this communication to actually happen to the point where you guys are supporting each other through this and not running away from each other through this? Because again, if we look at the way society looks at a lot of things now, you already described some of the personality of your wife, which is great. She's going to be there to support you. That's not every relationship. A lot of them, they're just going to hear that and be afraid and run away. So how did you guys sit down to have these conversations to work through this type of stuff to allow you to go off and do these things?
Yeah, it's a good question. So to be clear, she didn't think I had a drinking problem. That was 8 years ago. What pushed me to start to do all this work, and I'm finally to the point where I can say this out loud, not devoid of shame, but I've shed a lot of the same shame associated with this, and now it's just something I want to continue to fix. But I sought this help because of fits of rage toward my son. Started when he was about 7, give or take, which is the same age I was when my dad died, and I also experienced some other abuse around that same time. And I had no idea why, but I was like going off the handle, dude, like raging. And to the point where it was like, I wasn't beating him per se, but I would grab him by the shoulders and throw him on his bed. And one could argue there's no difference in many ways because I became a very threatening presence in his life at times. And it breaks my heart to think of the healing has to do, and will have to continue to do as a result of that. But I was having these like out of body experiences where I'd be like yelling at him, pointing my fingers in his face, telling him what he did was wrong or whatever, and like raging to the point that I was outside myself looking down. And I thank God for that kind of out of body experience, because it was like, oh my God, like what is happening? And that's when I started seeking help. And obviously my wife was witness to all of that. And so she knew something was wrong. We just didn't really know what. And so that was, the stakes were high. Like, it's not like I was feeling a little sad and I decided to go do some MDMA, right, with a therapist. Like, there was chaos in our house, and I had no idea where it was coming from, but it was this anger that was coming out. And I've since worked through it, and I understand that underneath the anger was some grief, and underneath that grief was some insecurity, and underneath that was some shame, and layer by layer, I've just been picking through it. And to her credit, she's been there the whole time picking up the slack, dude. Like, she's carried a heavy weight in my absence, and there's a volatility that comes. It's not a linear path to wellness. There's some ups and downs that she and I have navigated really well together. But it was actually 8 months ago, almost to the day, where we sat down and had what was probably the most therapeutic conversation of my life. I'll tell the story quickly. We went on, as part of our practice, we go away a couple times a year, just 2 or 3 days, to a local Airbnb that we find, and just spend us time to reconnect physically, emotionally, spiritually, all these things. And I had a ChatGPT generated retreat journal that we were going to work through. So I crafted these questions with AI, right? And then I feed them to her and we ask each other the questions. Well, she asked me, what do you need me to know about what it's like to be you right now? And dude, I broke wide open, like my heart opened and I sobbed. Like, the amount of grief that I experienced over the next 2 or 3 minutes was crazy. It felt as if a portal in my being opened up the same way the medicine had in the past, except there's no medicine on board. It's just my wife who has become the healing agent for me by this point. And that makes me overflow with joy just saying that out loud. But I sobbed, dude, couldn't get words out. And in that portal that opened up, I saw a well of grief so deep that it literally extended into eternity. And I know that makes me sound crazy, but I'm saying it anyways because it's just the truth. Like, I saw how deep it goes. And that sounds kind of like depressing, but it was actually really empowering and gave me tons of hope, because I was like, it ain't my job to get to the bottom of that. I don't need to solve for that. And as soon as I realized that, it was the only way I can describe it is, I would say it's like a divine download, like instantly. And I don't like the word download. I got to come up with a better word, because it came from inside of me. It was like a new piece of truth that was undeniably real, but it didn't come from outside of me. I didn't read it somewhere and make it my own, or someone didn't tell me and I didn't go, yeah, that sounds good. It like came from inside of me. And it was that, oh my God, I'm relating to my wife holding in my pain, afraid to let her know how much grief and sadness is inside of me because I don't think she'll be able to handle it. Well, if that's not the same exact story I told you about 7-year-old Mike and his mom, I don't know what is, right? And so that was a tangential way to explain to you some of her role in all of this. Like it began as her picking up the extra weight that I couldn't carry while I had to kind of tend to these very old wounds that were quite literally poisoning me from the inside. And it turned into her being one of the most potent healing agents in my life. And now and this is where the selfish and selfless stuff comes back in, trauma is contagious. And so when my trauma was unresolved, I was against everything I wanted, infecting my wife and children with that trauma. Well, the good news is that healing is also contagious. Mm-hmm. And so because I developed the courage and went against the grain to be selfish for a couple years and start to heal myself, well, now my wife and children are on their healing journey. None of them are taking psychedelic medicine or anything like that. They don't need to. I actually ended up, I think, taking it. I'm not saying I'll never use it again, but I can look back now and see, I got real genuine progress out of the first 4 sessions. And the last 2 sessions were like, dude, why you keep coming here? Mm-hmm. This is not where you're going to find the rest of your healing. It's on you now. And I needed it to tell me that a couple times before I really took it on my own.
I need the easy button. Please.
Yeah.
Please turn me open again.
Exactly.
So I tell people all the time that the 2 best decisions you can make in your life are following Christ and finding the right woman to marry. That's what I talk about, at least on this podcast. I'm talking to a bunch of dads, right? And your life will not become magical and everything's perfect and all the stuff, right? No. But what it means is that you have the right, proper support system in place to work through just about anything, because they're not running away from you. Like, Jesus isn't running away from you. God's there, right? If you chose the right wife and you didn't do the stupid things that could allow her to leave, then she's probably going to stick right by your side. So, some people do those stupid things and it's the woman's prerogative. She wants to leave, or vice versa. I'm very strict on, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, like the separation side of the house. I'm pretty strict on the separation and the divorce side of the house. I'm not a big fan at all of divorce. And I think that it is, because marriage is a covenant, not just a contract. Contracts we can get lawyers to get rid of. That's not what marriage is, right? So if the covenant is broken for very few reasons, then I can understand it, but there's very few reasons. So I'm rambling at this point, but following God, finding the right woman to marry. You've mentioned faith a couple times. You've mentioned God a couple times. I want to go into that question to you. What does faith and God and all that mean to you? Where are you at on that?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, of course, but I am a child of God. I follow Jesus Christ as best I can, fail every day, but I'm trying my best. And, when you talk about following Christ, that means way more than I could ever opine for anyone. But for me personally, one of the things that I took to heart was, one of the things he means is love yourself the way I love you, unconditionally. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole journey I just described for you, was what I needed to go through to learn how to love myself again. And the way I describe it is, some people need to learn how to love themselves in order to learn how to love God. And I also now know the opposite's also true. And God was at play the whole time. I just wasn't ready to give him credit for it. I had an experience recently, just like 2 months ago, was coming home from Dad's retreat, member of a group called Front Row Dads. And I was co-hosting a retreat with one of my buddies down in the Catskill Mountains in New York. And it was an incredible experience. Spent 3 days deeply connected to myself, deeply connected to God. And my capacity to connect with the other men there was higher than it's ever been. And then I'm driving home, dude. It was like a 3-hour drive. And it occurs to me that, like, I felt safer to be myself, like the version of me that God created me to be, not all the identities that I've built up around myself to protect myself for the last 40 years, but like my genuine self. Felt as if I was literally channeling God's will as I was speaking life into these guys through the retreat and whatnot. And I don't say that from a place of arrogance. It's just, that was my genuine felt experience. And then I'm driving home and I realized it's really sad that I'm more comfortable being that version of me, the most genuine version of me, with a bunch of dudes in the woods than I am with my own mother or my own sisters. And so I'll spare you the details of it all, but I had a pretend conversation with my mom about that while I was driving home, and then I bawled. And then I had that same conversation with my sister, and I bawled. And the backside of all that grief, which I was needed to come out a long time ago, right? I went, oh my God, I've been trying to move, and you've probably heard this, right? The longest journey you'll ever take is a spiritual journey from your head to your heart. It's moving Christ from your head, sane, I believe, to really moving him to your heart. And what occurred to me is when my son was born, it was witnessing the miracle of his birth. I'm like, okay, there's something else out there. I got to start looking for it. I had a very complicated relationship with religion in the past because of, some human imposed spiritual trauma, basically being asked or being told you don't belong here when I showed up to be confirmed as a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
The reason I didn't belong there is because there were 2 classes and I just showed up to the second one. I was supposed to be at both. But my adolescent self took it as like, oh, you don't belong in God's house kind of thing. I'm not good enough. So anyways, back to the car ride home, I recognized that ever since my son was born, I had been trying to move God from my head to my heart. And that's a noble intention. And it's also absurd to think that I, little Mike Wagner, have the capacity to move God from one place to anywhere else, right? What I realized in that moment, again, another one of these divine downloads, was that I've been trying to move God from my head to my heart for the last 12 years when all I ever had to do was get out of my head, drop into my heart, and see that he's been there the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In retrospect, I know why that was so hard for me. I had this idea of God in my head. You know who the God in my head reminds me of? Is the me who used to father my son with rage and shame. It was like 2 fingers pointed. If you get drunk, you're going to hell. Those lustful thoughts mean you're evil. Like just a very authoritarian idea of God. And when that was the case, whatever he told me not to do, I would do with enthusiasm, right? And it wasn't until, and it was actually when I started some breath work and then some of the medicine sessions where I came to realize, literally, God found me in that first medicine session, and I had a face-to-face with him. And what I learned was that, like, he's never been how I envisioned him to be. It would have been more accurate to see him as saying, hey, buddy, listen, you know that drunkenness, dude? Like, I love you. Trust me. I want the best for you. That's not going to work out in the long run. Mm-hmm. You know those lustful thoughts? They don't serve you the way you think you do. Trust me. I love you. Come over here, right? Follow me. And that's what I've been, as best I can, trying to do since then. And the thing that's shifted is it's not effortless anymore by any stretch, but it's so much easier to obey those, command almost sounds like too strong a word because he gives me free will, but like, guidance. That advice, that guidance, right? It's so much easier to follow now than it ever was before. And it creates so much peace and joy. It's like, I'm not a biblical scholar by any stretch, but like, what's fascinating to me is like, when things that are in the Bible that I've heard and been like, oh, that's kind of cool, when then I live it and I'm like, whoa, that's a peace beyond all understanding. Mm-hmm. The kingdom of heaven does lie within. Holy crap, like, this stuff's real. These aren't just fancy words in a, like, that sound good in a book. Like, once you've lived it, it's like, there's no turning back.
Yeah. And I would imagine, to go back to your "you don't belong here" comments, I heard that and I thought to myself, boy, how many times are we, let me preface this a little bit more. You don't belong here. You hear that at 14 years old, after having already experienced still the trauma that we're going to go back to again. Like, hey, my dad left when I was 2. I didn't belong there either. And then he died. And then, like, I can't be open and honest with my family because I need to stand up and be the man and do all this stuff. And then now all of a sudden at 14, and let's skip those 7 years in between your father passing and this. But all of this leading up to, okay, now I don't even belong here. Fantastic. Pound sand. I'm going to go off and do my own thing in the world. And, it made me kind of go, okay, well, what sort of things are we saying to our kids that, they're holding on to some sort of trauma that we may not even know? Like, we may have said something a long time ago that struck them in a way that was not even our intent. Like we may have said something that just, it struck them in a way at one point, and now all of a sudden, every time we say something similar, it's hitting a trigger for them. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on how we identify that in our kids. If we say something that clearly is a trigger, well, maybe it's not clearly, maybe it's subtly a trigger. And we have to be aware of that so that we can help father our children in the best way possible and see what their need is. So for that one person who said, hey, you don't belong here, in a completely innocent way, like, hey, you're supposed to be in the other class, but what you heard was banished, you're gone. How do we identify that feeling you had in our kids when we're saying something, when something's going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a couple things. The first is like, we can't protect our kids from that. It's going to happen. They're going to, right? Like that lady didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't malicious. She didn't mean to, right? And it happened because we live in a broken world. So it is what it is in that regard. And as fathers, we do have the capacity to guide and protect our children from unnecessary suffering as a result of that. And so I don't know. It's hard for me because all the advice I want to give, whether it's directly to my kids, like, or to other fathers relative to their children, it's like all I end up doing is saying the shit that I need to hear, right? And so like it's hard. But one thing that I did, and I'd like to do more often, it was actually Christmas 2 years ago. I actually printed off some leather scrolls and I wrote a letter to each of my kids. And the most powerful line in that letter was something to the effect of, if I've ever said or done anything that caused you to question your worth, my love for you, God's love for you, I'm sorry, right? And I'm sorry is the first step, right? But if there was a rupture, let's say there's something I did that caused them to feel that way about themselves, and then I feel bad, I want to feel better, so I say I'm sorry as a way for me to feel better. Well, that's not really repair, right? And there's some repair that happens with that. But the real value comes when I do the work to understand why I threw my pain at them. That's essentially what happens, right? Like, you don't belong here, even if it's unintentional. My presence aggravated that lady in some way. And so she said what she said, but she wasn't aggravated by me. My presence triggered something in her, right? And so to understand and kind of separate from the enmeshment we have, to understand that, like, I can't protect my kids from their feelings, and the more I try to protect them from the traumas that I've endured, the more that's actually where they're going to experience trauma, is when I try to protect them from the abandonment I felt. So I felt abandoned by my father, so there might be a tendency for me to helicopter my son and stay really close to him all of the time. Well, I'm trying to protect him from abandonment, but I'm also, I don't know what the word is, smushing him, right? And not allowing him to thrive in his own capacity. And so to me, I think between the insult and the apology needs to be the real work that allows me to then go apologize in a way that doesn't serve me at all, but just serves him. Right? Because it doesn't make me feel better because I've already done the work to heal the shame associated with my transgression. So by the time I go back and apologize, now it's real and genuine, as opposed to self-soothing. You see, now we're back to the selfish versus selfless. Is my apology selfish? No, the selfish part, which is healthy selfish, is healing the wounds that caused me to traumatize my child. The unhealthy selfish part would be rushing to an apology to make myself feel better.
Yeah. And then if you're not getting true forgiveness, then they're still holding on to something anyways, right? So you have to keep working that. That's why, I would venture to guess why biblically it's one of those, like, don't just do this 7 times, do it 70 times 7. Keep going back, right? Because there's going to be work there. I think a lot of this, being able to identify, to think back to my question and then hearing how you were answering it, it's one of those, sometimes it's not the ability to identify when the child has it, but giving them the freedom to let you know when they feel something. And if they don't feel that freedom to be able to talk to you, my wife and I were just having this conversation with both of our boys in the car yesterday on the way home from a theme park, where it was like, it almost hurts me if they appear to recluse themselves a bit, to not allow themselves to ask the question. It's just like, what have I done that makes you not want to ask that question. I never want a question to go unasked. I don't care if you think it's dumb. I don't care if you think it is, I'm going to be embarrassed or I'm going to hate you for it, or I don't care, because none of that is going to be true. I will always love you regardless. So how do I make sure that, because I'm not going to always see it, because I know I'm going to cause damage, because I know I'm going to say you don't belong here in a way that makes them feel incorrect, or a way that I don't intend them to feel, I need them to know that they can come and talk to me at any point, at any time, and tell me, hey, Dad, when you did that, it did this to me. Because I may not have seen it. I may have just done it. I may have done it over the phone, and then I hang up. I didn't see anything, So that's where, again, hearing your answer to my question is leading me to, okay, well, it all still comes back to our ability to be able to be open and honest with each other, because I'm not going to always notice it. I am going to screw up.
Right. And the way what you're talking about is essentially creating enough safety so that your children feel comfortable coming to you. And there's a tendency, especially men in particular, we want to fix and save and be the hero. And so there's a tendency to hyper focus on making them feel safe, when really the most effective way to create a safe space for them to come is to figure out how to create the highest levels of safety inside ourselves, because only then do they experience the safety of your nervous system. Your kids, my kids, know the difference when I'm agitated, white knuckling patience, versus when I'm genuinely being patient. And if you dole out consequences to your kids, and you dole one out from a place of fear or insecurity or aggravation inside of me, that consequence is likely going to escalate things. It's going to create additional chaos. I can dole out the same consequence from a place of grounded and centered love and actually have it be received. Because they're not responding to the consequence. They're responding to their nervous system and the level of threat or relative threat or safety that it feels. And as children, a good bit of their nervous system state comes directly from my nervous system as their father or their mother's nervous system. Generally speaking, the younger the kid, the more in tune with the mother they'll be, because for obvious biological reasons. And as kids grow, especially young boys, there's a transition away from mom and over to dad. And that's where the connection comes. Mm-hmm. And so all of that to say, again, selfish versus selfless, the best way to remediate those things that we've already unintentionally inflicted on our children is to actually securitize and master our own nervous system so that they can learn through our modeling what it looks like to expand their nervous system's capacity to handle stuff they don't like, right? That's what we're talking about, stuff we don't like, bad feelings.
Yeah. It brings me back to my dog handling days, where we used to always say that things travel down leash. And by no means am I trying to compare my kid to a dog. However, the concept is still the same, in that when we are scared, when we're angry, when we're whatever, our dog, as when I was a dog handler, pre-kids, knew it. They could tell that it would adjust how they responded to things. We could see the changes in the dog if we were open to seeing them. And not every handler is open to seeing those. They just expect a robot attached to that leash. I was that handler once in a while too. I need this robot to do its job, and that's it. But we do the same thing here in my family. And I always tell people, like, more is caught than taught. I mean, it's a very common statement. So what am I allowing them to catch versus what am I just saying? And is what I'm saying being backed up by what I'm doing versus, being juxtaposed negatively as an opposition to what I'm doing. And it's a very, very difficult thing. And by no means am I telling anybody on this podcast, that anybody listening, that, oh yeah, well, that means you need to be perfect all the time so they can see what perfection means, because that's never going to happen. And if that is what you're striving for, you're going to be in for a world of hurt, and your children are going to be in for a world of hurt, because they're going to have a very misguided idea of what perfection is, because there's only one perfect, and that guy died, rose again, and is sitting at the right hand of God. So none of us are him. So here we sit trying to emulate, but never fully accomplish that. But no, I love where you're going with that. And to me, it is always a constant, like, what am I doing right now to make sure that I'm showing up properly? Yesterday, I know I went off the handle a couple times. I was in a lot of pain all day walking around. I gave myself excuses as to, I pushed through a lot of it. I've got very bad knees and a bad back, and I was really hurting walking around this theme park. So by the end of the day, I told myself, all right, we're on our way to the front gate to go get in this car and be out of here. And then all of a sudden it was, oh, we need to go shopping and we need to go get some food because now people are hungry, even though I asked them 5 minutes ago and they weren't. And then I started getting so frustrated. And I was like, what in the world is happening right now? And I got very upset. I say very upset for me, not very upset in other ways because I was still mostly calm. But man, oh man, was I like, we need to fix this now, which did not help when it came to the asking a question and wanting an answer or seeing that they had a question and not getting it. And I was like, man, how do I make sure that I'm showing up a little bit better? And so my wife and I even chatted about that again on the way home. Like I'm at a place mentally, I'm exhausted, in a lot of pain. I have not taken any medication for this pain. I'm just suffering through it. And then I juxtapose that with, dude, you were a guy who was climbing the mountains of Afghanistan with rucksacks on your back and a dog going and finding bombs. And all of a sudden you're crying and complaining about walking around Universal Studios. What is wrong with you? Like, so then I'm angry at myself for getting to this physical stage. And I'm like, what is that? Like, and it was a mess. And again, it all came back to me, instead of how do I show up well for my kids? How do I show them how to work through all of this? How can I be open with them and just say, hey, Dad's in a lot of pain. I'm really hurting. I'm really sorry. I'm going to do my best to just not expose you guys to that. And I don't know what the right answer is necessarily, but man, is it difficult to work through when we have to realize, step up, show up, and then when you screw up, let them know.
Right. Well, and what's interesting in that story, I appreciate you sharing it. If you think through it, it's like the physical pain was a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you told the story, I don't know if this is actually true or not, but the way you told the story is you could handle that. It was the what's wrong with me. It was the layering on of the shame on top of the pain. Like, yeah, I'm in physical pain, but I can handle it until I remember that, man, I was rucking up the mountains of Afghanistan. Now I can't stand in line for 15 minutes. What's wrong with me? And it was the what's wrong with me question that it sounded like pushed you over the edge, at least your edge.
Actually, on the drive home. On the drive home is when I pieced that on. I added that lovely little addition to the cocktail I was creating for myself. Because when I was just standing there, that wasn't a part of it. At least not consciously.
Not consciously.
Not consciously, right? Because I did add it on later, so maybe it was still there. Like, you're a shell of your former self, and here you are just, like, standing in line trying to get food for your kids because they're hungry. When really all I was doing was, like, all I should have been doing is, okay, serving my family. You guys are hungry? Let's find you some food. But it was and I told my wife this. I said, I don't know. I was perfectly fine dealing with the pain, perfectly fine suffering through all this stuff. And I walked a lot of miles yesterday, if for no other reason to keep a little girl asleep in a stroller at times, right? And it was like, okay, I can deal with this. It is what it is. I could suffer through that. No big deal. But I was convinced that we were done. So I told my brain told me, you're finished. You're finally, there's the end goal, And then all of a sudden that goal was just gone. And that I did not react emotionally well to. And I was like, boy, that's a problem. That's a problem, right?
Well, it is, and it's a problem I would argue is best met with grace. Because, and you're doing this, and I'm not picking on you in any way, I do this all the time. You're doing it in a very subtle way, but you're using words like should, which is a shame-based word, which is like, well, if I were good enough, I'd do it this way. I wouldn't yell at my kids. And I get it. Like, you don't want to yell at your kids or become impatient. And when you say I should, what I think you really mean is I wish I had the capacity for that. But when you use the word should, there is a departure from, you are treating yourself in a way that's different from how Christ treats you. Right? Because the implication in what you said is, I'd be more deserving, I'd be better, I'd accept myself more if I could wait in this line and not freak out at my kids. But there's nothing you can do that will increase or decrease the amount of love that Christ has for you. You cannot earn anything. You know that as well as I do. Your highest value is in your mere existence. But as soon as you start telling yourself that you should X, Y, or Z, you're departing from that truth. Dude, we all do that. Of course, we're human, and trying to eliminate shame completely is hard. Like, laying shame down at the foot of the cross is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and still is to this day. The point I'm making is that then on the car ride home, the shame becomes conscious. I can go the next layer and be like, man, I shouldn't shame myself, right? Like, I shouldn't shame myself, and I shouldn't is shaming yourself. So essentially what happens is we end up pouring shame-flavored gasoline on a fire, hoping it'll go out. When the trick really is to figure out how we can more consistently apply grace to ourselves and our situation and watch the fire go out. And essentially, that's how we become the father we, of course, all want to be for our children. Right? But it's the opposite of how we achieve everything else. At least it's the opposite of how I achieved everything else in my life for the first 40 years.
Boy, don't I know that. Yes, as a military guy as well. I love the addition of the grace side of the house, because it is something that, especially folks that are, again, driving 1,000 miles an hour, not really used to giving. But I look at it, and I will say that there is a need sometimes for me or for us to realize where, have the grace, but go, hey, this is where you're screwing up. Because there's no, the Bible tells me not to, I'm going to screw up the words exactly, but there are two sides to this coin. Is one, the Bible talks about if you're not disciplining your children, then it means you don't love them, right? Because discipline allows them to understand right from wrong, allows them to see what's going on. Discipline does not mean I beat my kids. It means they
What
understand.
does discipline mean, though? What does discipline mean?
Guiding, well, if you're disciplining correctly, I believe it was guiding into the correct way of the way things should be done, right?
Rooted in the word to disciple.
Yeah, by giving them truth, by helping them understand. And then the other part is also not to, and again, this is the part that I'm going to butcher because I can't remember for some reason off the top of my head the exact words, but it's basically not to exhaust your child from what you're doing, right? And I look at it and go, I was exhausting my children because I was exhausted. And that's where I need to go, okay, I need to fix that, right? Because again, we're never going to reach that level of perfection to be Jesus walking around, and when I talked to my wife about it, I'm like, you're never going to be Jesus with a skirt, right? And I'm never going to be Jesus with, that whatever man cloth he had on at the time. It's just not going to happen, but we should be striving for these things. So if there was a guy I talked to, and I can't remember his name, out of Texas, he was on the podcast maybe 10 episodes ago, but really solid dude. We talked about striving for the fruits of the Spirit all the time, right? And the more that we are studying and reading the Word and going towards the fruits of the Spirit, the more we're going to show up in the world with those fruits of the Spirit, because that's where we're going. And if I can have that gentleness, that kindness, that patience, that, those things that I was lacking last night, I'm finding that limit of when I get to this point. Now I need to find something that catches me to show up better. Maybe it's take that minute and just sit down, read something out of the Bible. Maybe it's take that minute, just talk to my wife and say, hey, this is where I'm at right now mentally and physically. Can you help me kind of, stave off the wolves here for a second, but it's being able to identify that before it turns into an issue. And I think I'll show up better for my kids when I do that, because they'll see that thing of dad caught himself. This is how he corrected it. And I wasn't the brunt of that problem. So this was fun to talk through. Yeah. I mean, hopefully it's helpful for somebody else other than just me, but.
Well, it was helpful for me. So you already won that battle.
Yay! And right now it's just the two of us, so it's okay. So we didn't really talk about anything business because you told me that you're kind of on these new changes. So let me shift gears a little bit and go over to, all right, so you've done a bunch of real estate stuff. You've done physical therapy. So now you're this guy with a doctorate with a bunch of success in real estate that sits at home with his wife and raises kids. What's on the agenda next on the business side? I think I remember you saying something about you're working on potentially a new thing. So talk to me.
Yeah. And I'm happy to talk about it. It's interesting because I'm building, and that's the wrong word, but building this new venture. I'm pursuing this new venture in a way that's completely opposite everything I've ever built in my entire life. It's I'm going so slow, I feel like I'm pushing the brake rather than the gas pedal 100 miles an hour. But what I'm doing is seeking to support people. Most of my current clients are men, but I'm open to sharing with women as well, because I think I have the capacity to do that. But supporting men as they turn inward and approach and embrace the pain as a way to let go of it, and so that they can move on. It's essentially helping men eliminate the residue of their past that they may or may not be conscious of, so that they can learn to live in the present moment and then thrive into the future. And I do that through various modalities. I'm not a therapist by any stretch. It is coaching, but it's non-traditional coaching. It's not about, high fives and accountability and cheerleading and a new morning routine. Not that there's anything wrong with adjusting a morning routine to better serve you, but it's not about layering on more. It's about walking a different path. For a lot of guys that I work with, they're hard charging, high achieving entrepreneurs Generally speaking, their journey looks something like mine, where they thought if they arranged the world in a certain way, life would be perfect and they'd feel the way they want to inside. And they've done that long enough that they're far enough out of balance to realize it's not working, it's not well, something needs to shift. And my goal is not to heal them, I don't have that capacity, but to support them as they surround themselves with the circumstances that are going to allow the restoration of their system. Physically, emotionally, mentally, and I believe heart, body, and mind, if I can help men move toward wellness in each of those areas, that is moving them closer to God. They will, when they find the center in each of those three, what we'll call worldly realms, they can't help but drop into the center of who they really are. And that's where I think doing so empowers them to deepen their relationship with God. And that's what I was put on this earth to do, was essentially to ease suffering by showing people what it looks like to love themselves again, physically, emotionally, intellectually, and then spiritually. Most of the guys I work with have the intellectual thing figured out. Dude, I knew for 10 years that my worth was given to me by God, but my intellectual understanding was not enough to overcome the subconscious beliefs that were keeping me separate from him to the extent that they were. And, at risk of sounding overly dramatic, I mentioned earlier, like, I'm more connected to myself, more connected to God. My capacity to connect with other people in genuine, authentic conversation like the one you and I are having right now is higher than it's ever been. And if you had asked me what the byproduct of that would be, I would have been like, well, my loneliness will go away. And the opposite is true. Initially, I would have said it actually amplified. I know that's not true. What I now know is the loneliness has always been there. I'm just actually acknowledging it now. Yeah. And some of it's always going to be there, because I am, when I'm wrapped in this bag of meat, right? I'm in this body. I have this ego that I'm never going to shed until I meet God again when I die. I am going to be separate from God. I also know that my capacity to grow closer to him between now and the time I die is infinitely beyond anything I could imagine. And then once I die, it's even infinitely beyond that. Yeah. Right? So just because I can't get next to him while I'm on this planet doesn't mean it's not worth something it isn't something I should be striving for. And so that's what I'm doing. He's put it on my heart to essentially share what I've learned over the last 44 years of life with other people who are suffering. And interestingly for me, my suffering was rooted in the avoidance of my pain. It was ironically only once I acknowledged, literally this sounds so dramatic, but the pain of my existence, did the suffering start to fall away. And given the choice today, I will take pain over suffering every time, because in the pain is also the love and the joy and the aliveness that God created us all to experience. It's my humanity that causes me to try to avoid that pain. And I did that for long enough, and with the kind of results that showed me that suffering is far worse than the pain I'm avoiding. Clamping down around the feelings that I want to pretend I've dealt with, right? I was the dude who masterfully navigated the death of his father as a 7-year-old. I knew what to say to the psychologist to graduate. I knew getting good grades after my dad died made me better than if I came from a wholesome family, right? It's not actually true. Those are just the stories I told myself, right? I genuinely thought I handled it all. It wasn't until I went back and actually started to feel the feelings that I started to experience the freedom that God promises us. And so from a business standpoint, I've gone from a very savvy businessman to a very slow rolling, we'll see what happens, just kind of let it emerge organically hippie.
Yeah. There you go.
And I'm cool with that.
So the clients that you're looking for, or that may be seeking you out, are they already Christians, you think? Or are they, doesn't matter one way or another?
It doesn't matter at all, right? I mean, if we look to Christ as our example, he wasn't hanging around in the synagogues trying to convert people all the time. He was out at the well talking to prostitutes. And I think the people I serve, a lot of them do, like I did for a really long time, believe in something, or Or maybe they don't and they want to. Dude, I was riddled with doubt for so long. Like, it was just for a long, long time. And I thought that meant something was wrong with me too, right? Like, I wanted to believe. Parts of me wanted to believe. Parts of me thought I was stupid and naive for believing, right? And so I work with people who are on anywhere on the spectrum and with no intention to convert people. My goal is to love them and share my story and the things I've learned to whatever extent it supports them on their journey. And, some guys I talk to, really their goal is they want to learn how to love themselves. And they're not interested in the God stuff. Well, I'm not going to force it on them. I don't think that serves anybody. What I know in my heart is that if I can help them love themselves and move them closer to who they really are, well, I know they were created by God. So if I move them closer to who they really are and they know that person better, now, will they actually know God better too? Whether they use those words or talk about it in that way doesn't matter to me.
So it may open a door for them.
Right. Absolutely. I think the one bit of clarity I do have around what this looks like is I love meaningful conversations. That's what I try to fill my days with. And so, when guys go to my website, there's an open invitation to get on a call and just talk. And if a 45-minute call with no intention to sell anything results in me helping them feel better, the website is feelingbetter.work. A little bit of a double entendre there. Guys that are suffering, they feel better after they do some of this work. And so there's that, but the harsher truth is that we have to establish their capacity to actually feel better, which means feel the good and the bad as a path to quote unquote feeling better in the more worldly sense. So we do Zoom conversations. I have guys, I built a shed out back, I alluded before. It's got a sauna and a cold plunge and, some exercises, a yoga mat and for some embodiment work and those type of things. So I have guys that come out here for kind of in-depth sessions. And then we do retreats a couple times a year. I'm putting one together in a few months. I don't know when this episode will air, but it'll be in March of 26, where, 6, 8, 10 guys, we get together in an Airbnb and we talk about what's real and what's working and what's not. And my hope is that the guidance I offer them and the group is able to co-create together empowers these men to go back home and integrate a new level of wellness into themselves so that can spill over into their family, right? So that they're less exhausted and therefore exhaust their children less.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Mike, it's been fantastic getting to know you a bit, having a good conversation. I appreciated it probably more than I could tell you. There was a lot of back and forth that, like I said, helped me out a ton. So I appreciate that, and hopefully it helped those that are listening. You said feelingbetter.work, is that right?
Correct.
All right, so feelingbetter.work. Is that the best way for folks to get a hold of you, or is there a better way, easier way?
No, that's probably the best way. They could jump on there, read through, learn a little bit more about my story. If it resonates, I always invite people to have a conversation. There's a connection page that gives them an opportunity to jump on a phone call and just connect.
Very good. Well, Mike, I have greatly, again, appreciated having the conversation. Anybody that's listening, I'm positive that you've got a ton out of this as well. Please let us know below. Put it in your comments or send me an email. Let me know what your favorite part of this conversation was. Share it with somebody that you think is going to get something out of this. And then, of course, reach out to Mike if there's anything he could do to serve you, which I'm positive there is something he can. So, again, thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody listening. And we will see everybody on the next show.
Thank you so much for listening to the Biz Dad Podcast. We hope you found some value in your time here with us, and we look forward to bringing you the next episode. If you've enjoyed today's show, please subscribe and share so you and your friends won't miss our upcoming episodes. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Rumble, where we continue these discussions and share more valuable content. Be the dad you know you need to be and run your business in a way you're proud to share with your kids. Keep crushing it.